Hello and welcome to my channel, TFF, Teacher from Finland. In this video, I will explain the concepts of moral subject and moral agent, and what is the moral significance of intentionality, or the intent behind an act. If you are interested in this sort of thing, that is philosophical ethics, perhaps you should consider subscribing to my channel. Moral or immoral acts are not just any acts. Picking your nose might be unpleasant for others to watch, but few would call it immoral. That is because it doesn't actually harm anyone. And that is the sort of thing that typically makes a big difference. If you are considering doing something that would be at least likely to cause harm to other people, you will probably think that to be an immoral thing to do. The person possibly suffering the harm matters, because they are considered a moral subject. A moral subject is anyone or anything that is relevant to morals. Not all things are. For example, inanimate objects, like my coffee mug, are not usually considered moral subjects. There is an analog for moral subject in law, legal subject. In law, such entities are all humans and legal persons such as NGOs and businesses. The point is that if it can have subjective rights and those rights can be infringed upon, then it is a legal subject. For example, if you steal from a legal person, whether a human being or not, you are committing a crime. You can harm someone's property by chopping down your neighbor's tree, for example, but the legal issue there is that you harmed the property, not that you harmed the tree. You infringed upon the rights of the owner of the tree, not the rights of the tree because it didn't have any. It was not a legal subject. Legal subjects are defined in law, but moral subjects are not. Everyone seems to agree these days that all humans are moral subjects. But there is a debate about what others also should be considered moral subjects. One view, that of sentientism, is that all sentient beings are moral subjects. Being sentient means being capable of sensing or feeling or having experiences, and the ability to experience pain, to suffer, is considered especially important from an ethical point of view. For example, pets are easily seen as moral subjects. At least Western people are horrified by stories of dogs being harmed in any way. People in other cultures may have a hard time understanding that, especially as they can see humans suffering because of the actions of Western people and especially their governments, corporations and militaries. Sentientists also have a hard time understanding many of the Western people who are so shocked by the bad treatment of dogs, but at the same time have no trouble using animal products, even eating meat and feeding their dogs and cats meat, as they have to be fed meat since they are not herbivores. How are the chickens and pigs in a factory farm morally different from cats and dogs? It is possible to go beyond sentientism in defining moral subjects. Perhaps all living things should be considered some kind of moral subjects. Even some sceneries have been given a legal status. Perhaps even such fairly abstract things could be considered morally relevant. A concept similar to moral subject is moral agent. It too has an analog in law, legal agent. Not all legal subjects are legal agents, or their agenthood may be restricted. For example, minors have a limited capacity to act in a legal sense. This is connected to their limited responsibility. In Finland, a person under 15 years of age cannot be held legally responsible for a crime and will therefore serve no prison time. But they will have to compensate for damages they have caused. They also cannot sign legal contracts autonomously. In general, they require the help or supervision of their guardians, but do have some limited powers. Perhaps more importantly, the older they are, the more their own opinions have to be taken into consideration by said guardians. Inanimate objects can only be property. They can never be legal agents. Pets or other non-human animals are also considered property in law, so they cannot be prosecuted for committing a crime, but their owners might be held accountable for what their pets do. A dog could be put down for biting a child, for example, not as a punishment for the dog or even the owner, but as a measure to protect others from this perceived danger. The owner may be fined and be forced to pay the victim something in recompense. A person's legal agenthood can be temporarily or permanently limited by a court of law due to medical reasons, if they are no longer able to take care of themselves due to dementia or other medical condition. Also, inebriation and similar conditions reduce one's legal agenthood. A contract made when clearly drunk is null and void, for example. Being under the influence while committing some act may be considered a mitigating circumstance, although things like driving a car under the influence is obviously a crime in itself. A moral agent is similar to a legal agent. Not all moral subjects are moral agents. In fact, only humans are generally considered moral agents, and even among humans, only normally developed adults are considered such fully. Children are considered moral agents in a limited sense, so that if a small child hits another person, they are reprimanded, but they are not considered quite as morally blameworthy for the act as an adult would be. Besides responsibility, there are other criteria that legal and moral agents are usually considered to have. One of the most important of them is freedom. If a person is forced to do something against their will, they are not normally considered responsible for that act. So, in effect, they are not being moral agents at the time. Whoever is forcing them is considered the real actor, the moral agent, worthy of the blame. On the other hand, even with a gun to my head, I do have the option to disobey. So, if I am being threatened with death, unless I murder another person, I still have the option to disobey and die, as the existentialists emphasize. So, I may still be thought to have at least a limited agenthood. To be able to disobey, I need to have consciousness and autonomy of action. We can imagine a science fiction scenario where I have some kind of cybernetic implants installed in my brain. A netrunner could then hack my system and take control of my body. I could be either conscious or unconscious, while they would use my body to commit a burglary. Being so controlled, if I could prove it, I would probably not be held responsible for the crime even if caught. Few would think me immoral either. One interesting criterion for moral agenthood is rationality. Most people are thought to be rational and able to account for their actions and the reasons for those actions. But some people are insane, for example. A person may be able to use temporary insanity as a defense to mitigate their responsibility for a crime. People will also usually judge less harshly a person's behavior if they know the person to be suffering from mental illness. But in some cases, they actually might not, because they might think that what is legally considered insanity is just the person's evil nature. The law only deals with acts, but morals are also used to evaluate whole persons. And the whole person can be considered a bad person, a lousy excuse for a human being. Whether or not an act is considered immoral when committed by a moral subject often has a lot to do with the intent behind the act. It is possible to cause harm unintentionally, of course. Sometimes that is no excuse, just as in law, negligence can be punishable. If you should know better, you cannot appeal to ignorance. If you should have the skill to avoid the harm, you cannot appeal to incompetence. For example, if you get a job running a nuclear facility and then happen to cause a reactor meltdown, it's no use to say that you had no idea what you were doing. You were supposed to be competent at the task. If you perform a surgery and leave instruments inside the person you operated on, as actually happens sometimes, you will most likely be held responsible because it is your job to be able to avoid such things. Sometimes your intentions may be the best and still something bad happens. And it's not even because of your negligence. You simply could not avoid it, or being able to avoid it cannot be realistically demanded. For example, you are riding a bicycle when a child suddenly steps in front of you. You swerve to avoid the kid and crash into a window pane being carried by window installers, causing the pane to shatter. It's not your fault because you could not have avoided the crash in that situation. Or maybe you are at a cafe. Another patron comes in and asks you to hand them a handbag they say they accidentally left by the table next to you. Just as they've left with the bag, the real owner of the handbag returns to the table and asks you if you've seen their handbag. You were just trying to help someone, and it only now occurs to you that you helped a thief. Are you culpable? Blameworthy? Sometimes an act can be known to have a double effect. In order to do a good deed, something bad will also result. Thomas Aquinas coined the doctrine of double effect, claiming that in such cases the intention is what matters. If the intent is good, the act, despite causing some harm, is itself good. If the intent is malicious, then it doesn't help if it has some good effect, as the motivation makes the act evil. An example of such an evil act might be committing a fraud that gives the victim some consolation while ridding them of a significant amount of money. This could be achieved by claiming to be able to contact their dear departed. An example of a good act with a double effect could be a physician amputating a gangrenous limb to preserve the patient's life. That's it for now. In the next video, I will talk about 2 special types of act. See you then. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome. All humans and legal births is an analog for moral subject in law. Legal subject.